Today we will talk about trusting the authorities. How do we get our information? What do we do when authorities tell us something? I think I come from a little different background than many people because as an engineer, authority doesn't mean much to me. In fact, they happen to be in a position of authority, but that doesn't give them authority. Let's start back in March. I was visiting my friend at USC, and we were supposed to go to a fun talk. Except that she didn't know where the room was and she called the operator and was directed to this place where we saw lots of people gathered. Apparently, it was a talk about the coronavirus. March 5th, it wasn't a big deal yet. We've heard a little bit about it. I was reading up about it, but it wasn't that widespread. People weren't scared. There was no run on toilet paper or anything. They were talking about how USC was preparing to handle the coronavirus. And there was one lady in charge, an administrator, and the audience was mostly non-doctor staff. And I noted that, she lied at least twice. Blatant, obvious lies, at least to me. But nobody said anything. And I don't even go to USC. I have no affiliation with USC. I'm a visitor. I probably shouldn't even have been there, so I wasn't gonna say anything. But it seemed obvious to me that she lied at least twice. One was when somebody asked about community spread, because that was becoming a hot topic. As in, can you get it from somebody else in the community? Is it already there? As in, people are getting it from contacts who have not been to China. And it's obvious that community spread was a big deal, and it was going to be a bigger and bigger deal. It was going to be the big deal, the main form of transmission from here on out. But she said, no, it's not a big deal. Later on, somebody else asked some question about it, and she addressed it saying, if you get it from community, it won't be that serious. That doesn't make any medical sense. Does the virus distinguish how you get it? So if you get it from somebody who happens to be in America versus somebody who was in China, it's more or less serious? That just makes no sense to anybody who has even a basic understanding of how pathogens work, how virus bacteria work. And after that, I was going to work at the hospital, at another hospital, and I found it interesting how, the administrators kept saying all these things that, we're fine, we have enough protective personal equipment. And I realized it's all the same everywhere, right? In the beginning, China suppressed a lot of information, saying it's fine. And some people justified it, saying the government's role is to keep people calm so they don't freak out. Well, is that the same as an administrator's role in a hospital? You lie, but you say it's for the good, the whole. So they kept having these daily meetings talking about how they're preparing this or that. Another doctor had brought up, should we be reusing stuff? We're not going to have enough. How come the nurse is saying, that we don't have enough? And the administrator kept saying, no, we're fine. The nurses don't know. And as a doctor, I would think the nurses know much better than me if we have enough masks, because they're the ones who actually bring out the masks. Until the last day, then all of a sudden, the answer went to be, we don't have enough. We only have 3 weeks. How do we go from we have plenty to we only have 3 weeks left? It obviously didn't change overnight. Somebody was lying. Let's review a timeline of the events in the world. So late December is when this stuff sort of was first figured out in China. They weren't absolutely sure, these doctors who raised the first alarm. In fact, Li Wenliang is an ophthalmologist. One would wonder, what does he know about viruses, especially lung viruses? But he's seen SARS before and he's an intelligent man, obviously, so he figured it out. But China suppresses the early doctors. They warn them, saying you don't want to spread mischief like this, raising false alarms. But the virus spreads more and more, and finally China declares a state of emergency and locks down Wuhan. So state of emergency is declared January 20th, and Wuhan is locked down January 22nd. January 20th is also the date the first case was announced in Washington state. So this time in Asia, a lot of countries had already made moves to block flights and stuff, people coming in from China. January 30th, more than a week or so later, WHO declares a global health emergency. Notably, they did not declare a pandemic. The CDC confirms person-to-person transmission spread within the US, which only makes sense now that we know this. And January 31st, Trump makes moves to block foreigners from entering the US if they've been to China, particularly Wuhan. Starting in February, there's a lot of stuff going on, but the CDC works on their testing. Obviously, they were bad and they didn't want to use others. Who knows why, right? They want to create their own. And March 11th is when the WHO declares it is a pandemic. And then that's when Trump declares travel restrictions from Europe. And later, Trump declares a national emergency. In the Bay Area, they have orders for shelter in place starting March 17th. So during this time, in the beginning part of March, that's when this is all sort of going through my head. So March 5th was when I went to the USC talk. I went to work in the hospital a few days later. And so there's obviously a lag in information. Information comes out first on the news or on reports on the Twitter or social media. And the people, the bigwigs process it and they determine what to do with it, right? And it's funny how they process it. Because somehow they should have known, I would think, at USC that community spread was already a thing and it was important and it will be more and more important, not imported cases. But somehow they said it wasn't important. So there's a few theories or explanations for this. One is that there's always going to be a lag, right? Because they want to verify themselves. They don't trust others. Maybe that's the explanation why the CDC didn't want to use the WHO's testing or other countries, because they don't trust them. But that also presumes that you could do it better. And that's the issue I have, right? Why do people in authority always have to feel they could do it better if they do it their own way? If there are other ways that work, wouldn't you just copy them? It's not like we're talking about intellectual property here. It's not like you can't copy other countries' methods. It was very obvious to me at the beginning and to so many other people that there were two ways of handling this. One is the Chinese way. You have very strict quarantine when you weld the doors, the gates of the building shut so people can't move. That shuts down the virus. Yes, it does. It also causes a lot of harm, economically and otherwise. And they happen to have a great delivery system in China, so people still were able to get food and stuff like that. And the other concept of widespread testing, like South Korea. But instead, you choose to do your own thing, which I find interesting to say the least. But the thing is, I don't have a great view of authority in the first place. I guess as a child, I always questioned them why they say this, why they say that, right? They have to explain themselves to me. Many times adults don't feel like they have to explain themselves to a little kid. My question is, why not? Just because you're a teacher doesn't mean you're right. I figured this out in middle school when our friend questioned the teacher, and the teacher threw him out of class for being so disobedient, shall we say. But my friend was actually correct. And this was in 8th grade. And I learned from a very early age that teachers can be wrong. And they are wrong. I realized that again in college. So I had this renowned professor, Randy Katz. He is one of the group that developed GRADE, which is a system that most people who are computer enthusiasts know. I was taking his class and he quoted a number wrong. And it's just off by, a few magnitudes of order, sort of like gigabyte versus megabyte. It's not a big deal. I raised my hand to point it out very nicely, but insisted he was right. So I didn't push it, but the other students came to me during the break and said, yeah, you got it wrong. It's not a big deal, right? Well, it is and it isn't. The big deal is, why do people in authority have an inability to concede even the littlest thing wrong? It's just a simple mistake. They don't know humility. They don't know how to say they're wrong. And it's not particular to President Trump. I mean, the administrators at my hospital, they didn't apologize for being wrong about sufficient personal protective equipment. But luckily today, we have a lot of information out there. We can look at it ourselves and make a judgment. It's not like in the olden days, hundreds of years ago, when people couldn't read and thus they depend on the priest, the clergy, to read to them, to interpret information for them. Nowadays, there's lots of sources of information. And the key is figuring out what's bunk, what's rumor, what's true, what's valid, what's worth considering. Obviously, in hindsight, it's so easy to say all these people are wrong. WHO, CDC, they were so delayed. But who could have known back then when they didn't have complete information? And I think the idea is that you have certain principles you follow when you evaluate information. And you continue following those principles to validate new information as it comes in, to see whether it's trustworthy, whether you need more validation, whether you need confirmation, whether you should discard it right then and there. And so we will continue our journey in talking about coronavirus. And if you have any questions, just feel free to write in the comment section, and I'll try to address it at a future talk.